When we go to Warzone Ranked, we can see we're in one of the best spots we've ever been in when it comes to the Warzone meta. What we can see right here is after the most recent update, you can see kind of like all these lines converge together. And obviously if they were all touching, that means the pick rates are very close to each other, meaning that most people are grabbing kind of whatever they want. And there's a good distribution of weapons. And it's not like it was before where we had like a 30% pick rate. So with that being said, there's probably like 20 different long range options you can go with, especially if you're playing a smaller map like Rebirth Island or Fortune's Keep. It's going to broaden those ranges because one of the biggest things that separates the Caldera meta from the other small maps is not only the weapons, how much recoil they have, but it really comes down to the 3x to the 6x optic. So we start off with the Nikita, which the biggest weakness is the damage per mag. If this thing had like a 75 round mag or an 80 round mag, like the Automaton, it would probably be the meta or almost absolute meta for both of the maps. But since it does have a little bit of a smaller damage per mag, you're going to go ahead and primarily use this on Rebirth Island and Fortune's Keep, and it is a really good option. The build we'll be using is the MX Silencer, the Empress 613mm, 3-6x optic, which is pretty much what we're using. You could do the 2.5 if you are only sticking to the smaller maps. We got the Empress Notch, Perfectionist, on-hand polymer, lengthened 50 round, and then strife angled. Keeping in mind that there are certain preferences that there's not like a one size fits all. There's certain scenarios where you might feel a little bit better. Some people might prefer using the hand stop or even the carver, but that really comes down to individual preference. So this is kind of like a general build that should work for like 99% of players, but if you want to kind of mix and match something, you can definitely do that with any of these builds by maybe mixing or changing one attachment or adjusting for initial recoil versus sustained recoil, which we covered in yesterday's video. Then we got the Automaton, and you can see kind of some of the gameplay in the background. I'm doing this kind of hand testing with these individual builds to kind of give a little bit of an idea of how they perform at 120 meters. Am I able to shoot this person in the window if that's what I needed to do? Because that's what you need to do on Caldera. You need to be able to hit somebody at 120 meters. If you can't do that, you're going to struggle in gunfights because somebody else is going to be using a gun that can definitely do that. In the 80 meter range, 75 meter range that we're looking at, that is more for Fortune's Keep and Rebirth Island, and that's going to be a significant difference, especially when we look at some MW and Cold War guns. You're going to see how different these buildings look with the regular 3x versus the 3 to 6x that the Vanguard weapon has. Automaton build, it really hasn't changed much. We got the MX Silencer, 600mm BFA, 3 to 6x Anastasia padded, tight grip, on-hand polymer, 75 round, lengthen, and carver foregrip. Again, there are certain preference things, so if you feel like you want to change it, maybe the perfect build for you, but if you want to change it because maybe you saw something or you want to just experiment, more power to you. Then we got the Cold War AK, which you could also swap out for like the XM4 or something like that. There's going to be tons of option. EM2, the C58. There's a lot of options that you can use here. I'm just kind of giving you a general idea of the ones that probably rise to the top for most players. And you can see with the AK-47, it gets a little bit tricky because that door is so tiny when we're trying to shoot it at that individual range. And that's why this one, although it can put out the damage and has a good damage per mag, it is better suited for Rebirth Island and Caldera, especially if you're on controller. You're going to get aim assist, where that's going to help a little bit slow down that aim, so you'll be able to get a little bit more accurate even on top of that. And the build on this really hasn't changed. Depending on the mode, you might change the mag out. We got Groove Suppressor, RPK barrel, Axial Arms 3x, Spetsnaz grip, and the Bakelite 60, or you could just go the 45, which is definitely fine for solos, duos, but if you don't want to get caught reloading, the 60 is going to definitely bump that up by an extra 30% right there. We also have the Vargo, which hasn't been super popular, even though it performs consistently. Good fire rate, almost no recoil. But again, the optic, you can see that visual difference, especially at the 120 meters. Then when we go to the 75 meters, it gets a little bit tighter and super easy to use. And I think a lot of times the Cold War and Modern Warfare guns basically use whatever, and a lot of people might even ask, hey, why can't I just use the SUSAT? That's what Cold War has. If you try that optic, it just does not feel good. It's super sluggish, slow, The zoom doesn't feel good and it feels weird and wonky to control, even though the zoom does effectively give you that 3:6. It just doesn't feel good. Same thing with Modern Warfare. There are variable zoom optics and they just do not feel good the same way the 3:6X does. So you just got to factor that in what you're going to play. But at the end of the day, if you have fun with one gun and you can control it, try to avoid those 100-meter distances so you're not getting beamed by somebody that looks like an ant on your screen, right? So we got the Vargo, which is the Group Suppressor Task Force. Spetsnaz Speed Grip. Somebody actually turned me on to this when we were streaming and we were testing some of the things live. Somebody said you should try that one out. I was like, I'd never actually tried that one out, and it actually does feel pretty good. The 3X and the 60 round, and there you go. And like I said, you copy those similar builds for a lot of the Cold War guns, very similar. And then we do have a couple Modern Warfare guns, and the main thing that they struggle with is, again, that optic, and we can see it in the gameplay. You can see the Kilo, relatively easy to control, but when you're hitting somebody at 120 meters, you cannot afford to miss shots. Even though they reverted the change and they buffed it back to the OG year one Kilo in terms of damage and range and all that stuff, the problem is they changed the health, which makes it still take an extra 2 shots compared to the original Verdansk. And then on top of that, now you're stretching that ammo a little bit thinner because it's only 60 round and a low damage weapon, but it still gives you that vibe. If you really prefer MW guns, the Kilo is still pretty competitive. You just got to be aware of that, again, optical difference. The build for that, monolithic, single arms Prowler, 3X, Commando foregrip, 60 round mag. There is a kind of an alternative to this. If you want to save an attachment, maybe get a little bit faster, you can actually get rid of the Prowler barrel and go to the Whisper. It's going to come with an integrated suppressor, and I would recommend that more for maybe Rebirth Island or Fortune's Keep, since those ranges will be a little bit smaller. Maybe you can get fully loaded or sleight of hand or something like that if you want to go ahead and kind of have that extra attachment, or even attack laser. You just want a little bit better aim down sight, and maybe you run a 100 round mag and that offsets that part. But to each their own, but at least you have some options there. Then we got the M13, which is still pretty much a laser, but it burns and bleeds through ammo. I really, even though it got that neck damage buff, and it requires just one less headshot if you get a neck shot type thing, this thing is still, it should have an 80 round mag. If this had an 80, 75, 80 round mag, it would be able to compete because you wouldn't just go, oh, I gotta reload, I gotta reload. That's the biggest problem with this. And again, you can see the visual on that door at 120 meters, a little bit tricky there. The monolithic suppressor, Tempest Marksman, VLK, Commando foregrip, 60 round mag. And this one, you can also do that same thing where you get the integrated suppressor with the Tempest Cyclone. You either go tack laser, sleight of hand, or fully loaded. Sleight of hand could be a good option with this, but again, for those smaller maps, like Rebirth Island and Fortune's Keep. So we got the Burst UMG, which you can see, it still kind of mostly goes straight. You don't really have to adjust for any kind of recoil. It pretty much goes straight, but it does have that visual kind of bounce that they added to the bar as well. It just feels way worse on the bar. And normally we wouldn't promote too many LMGs just because most people kind of avoid those. But with the drastic changes to everything else, it kind of made it so that this is a really top tier option. The only downside, again, it is an LMG. So we'll go ahead and go MX Silencer, the 560mm, which is the burst barrel. You hold it and it will do a full auto burst. It'll go brr, 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 and you don't have to actually spam that trigger, which is kind of nice. The 3.6X, the Remoltac YR, the brace on hand, stippled, 125, lengthened and angled. And the main thing that we're solving for here is the initial recoil so that we get that burst and help kind of in check. A lot of people are gassing up the long range Volk, but I think the close range one is significantly better. You can either do a full strafe build or you can set it up much more for like a sniper support. Its TTKs are pretty good and it excels between that 12 to 15, 20-ish meters because it is a rifle. It gets that extra distance. But in the long range version, this one's cool, but primarily in solos, damage per mag is atrocious, and you're gonna end up catching people where you gotta reload before you thirst them because the 40 bullets is nice, but even though it's accurate, you're not going to be able to get like 3 downs and a third. It just doesn't work that way. So you got to play the right mode for that, but super easy to use. We got MX Silencer, the 428mm 05V, 3-6X, the Reisdorf adjustable Perfectionist on hand, stippled, 45 round mag, lengthened, and then strife angled. Again, there's certain things that are preference. So if you want to swap one attachment here, go ahead and try it. See how it feels, because I might prefer one over the other and vice versa. You might prefer another one. Does that mean one's better than the other? No, because whatever works for you is what is the goal, right? Like that's the goal of having a loadout that's going to fit your needs. Then we go ahead and get into a couple of the top tier ones that people have been talking about for a little bit. We got the Cooper. The Cooper does have a few different builds. Obviously, we covered that yesterday in the sustained fire and initial recoil, and we went full one bolt inside so we can have that comparison, but you can kind of mix and match, right? So for example, with the Cooper, it is a low recoil gun. When it comes to the attachments, we got the MX silencer, the Cooper Custom 36X, Cooper Custom padded, tight grip, fully loaded polymer, 60 round lengthen, and then hand stop. And then there are people that maybe only going to play the smaller map, and this thing could be even better because you can do the compressed rounds, which will help with that fire rate. And that could be an additional thing. Maybe you like the Carver foregrip better than the hand stop, because obviously the Strife angle got nerfed, but it still is a pretty good option. It's kind of like you got vertical is Carver, horizontal is Strife angled, and then hand stop gives you a little bit of both. And depending on the weapon and how it feels, you might prefer one over the other. So even if you do not like the hand stop, maybe try the Carver, right? Like each their own in those specific scenarios. Now we've kind of simplified it where we got a lot of the attachments locked down, and then one might be preference depending on the individual, even though this will probably work, the other one will probably work, and the other one will probably work, right? And it's just a matter of, hey, this one feels a hair better. And then we got the UMG, but the auto version, and this one feels a little bit like an M13, but it has a 36X optic, and it has the 120 round mag. So if you really like the M13, this one feels very similar because the recoil is pretty straightforward. The rate of fire is super fast, and you got a lot of that going for it. It does have that little bit of visual bounce, but it's mostly just the visual bounce. MX silencer, the Bernard, the 3-6X, the Mercier WT, tight grip, on hand, hatch, Sakura, lengthen, and Strife angle. And there's like in scenarios, maybe you want to use polymer to combine with tight grip. And then there's other scenarios where maybe you just want to work on the horizontal and affect that recoil control. And each gun's going to be slightly different based on feel. Then that brings us to the meta chaser category. And there's a lot of stuff in here where people are kind of tied between what the heck am I going to use? This is really the meta at the end of the day. The number one weapon that people will use, probably if we look at the Warzone ranked within about a week, is going to be the KG-M40, and then maybe the NZ is there because it definitely got nerfed. If you're playing on a smaller map, it doesn't feel quite as much like it got nerfed because there's instances where you're still gonna be able to hit the shots. But you can see from the recoil pattern, if we look at the NZ, how it shoots, it starts off super easy to use, but then it gets a little bit bouncy, and then it kind of like wobbles. So you almost have to let go of the trigger, reset it, and it does that kind of weird stuff. So personally, I'm not a fan of the NZ anymore. I feel like you can definitely notice from how broken it was to how it is now. It's just super good, but it's not broken like it was before, at least not in my opinion. So the NZ, we're going to use the MX silencer, the Orb Weaver 36X, Orb Weaver E-Pack, brace, fully loaded, hatch, 50 round, lengthen, and the Strife angle. Brings us to the KG-M40, which is kind of like a weaker gun. It's slow, it kind of sluggish like an LMG, but it has the bullet velocity, it has the damage per mag, it has the recoil, it has, like, you know, all the other boxes are checked to make this thing a super good weapon. And at the end of the day, there might be some preferences that sneak in overall time, because we got that new rifle, which hopefully gets a buff because the bullet velocity is on that atrocious. It doesn't even have a barrel to work with, but here we go. The KG-M40 is the MX silencer, the Reisdorf shrouded, 36 padded, brace, on hand, hatch, 60, lengthen, and the Strife angled. And again, you might want to tweak some things here based off what we talked about in the previous video if you prefer going for all sustained recoil over initial recoil or whatever the case is. So that's long range meta. Hit the like button. See you on the next one. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.